Hello again, everybody, and God be with you. Another story from the Bible Baddies. This one is about another one of the baddies who actually ended up being quite a goodie. The nation of Israel has three patriarchs, three founding fathers. The first was Abraham, the second was Isaac, and the third was Jacob. Although Jacob wasn't always as good as you would want him to be. And this story is about him. It's called The Trickster's Tale. And this is how Bob introduces the story. You reap what you sow. The bad things you do come back to haunt you. Whatever image you choose, gardening or ghost, the story of Jacob looks at first like proving these sayings true. Jacob deceived both his brother and his father to win an inheritance. And in turn, he is deceived, first by his uncle and then by his own sons. It looks as if the story has come full circle and Jacob has got what he deserves. The trickster is tricked. The end. But that's not exactly how it goes, because somewhere along the line, Jacob runs into God. And even though their relationship turns into a bit of a wrestling match, Jacob discovers that God is far less interested in punishment than he is in mercy and forgiveness. So while Jacob still reaps some of what he sowed and still has to deal with the odd haunting dream, he also finds something else. He finds a new strength and renewed faith in God. And that's what makes his story so compelling. Jacob held the coat against his face and rocked gently back and forth. His tears mixed with the bloody stain. The ragged rips in the cloth tore holes in his heart. His son, Joseph, was dead, bloody and torn like the coat, consumed by some savage beast. And there was nothing that could comfort him. No words to wail that would make any difference. There was just a hole where his son had been, a hole that would never be patched or mended. Jacob had other sons, of course, but Joseph was special, the child of his beloved Rachel. And he could hear them talking and laughing outside the tent. Jacob was no fool. He knew they hated their brother, hated him because Joseph had known he was special and had not let them forget it. But that was no excuse. The dead, even the despised dead, deserved respect. Jacob tried to sleep. He folded Joseph's torn coat, the coat he himself had made, and tucked it under his head for a pillow. Then he shut his eyes and prayed that sleep would come and take his pain away. But all sleep brought was dreams, and the dreams were more painful still. Soon Jacob was dreaming about brothers, not the noisy young men outside, but Jacob himself and his twin brother Esau. His mind whirled back to life at home as a young man. They had always been rivals. Esau, with his red locks, hairy arms and strong back, was their father Isaac's favourite. And Jacob, smaller and rather fragile, was ever under the watchful eye of their mother Rebekah. At last the time came for Esau to claim his birthright. He was the elder of the two, just, so tradition dictated that blind old Isaac's blessing should be given to him, along with the right to rule the family and inherit the family fortune. But Rebekah was canny and clever and shrewd, and she was determined that her favourite, Jacob, would receive that blessing instead. And so the dream went on, as Rebekah's voice echoed around inside Jacob's head. Take your father his favourite meal. Lower your voice, you'll sound just like Esau. Wrap your arms in these goatskins. Your father's blind, but he's no fool. He'll want proof. And when he is convinced that you are your older brother, that is when you should ask him for his blessing. The dream was so clear, so real. Jacob saw himself in the dream smiling a smug smile, delighted, for the trick had worked. And once given, the blessing could not be taken back. And he saw his brother Esau beside himself with anger. His face matched the colour of his bright red hair. Esau knew there was nothing he could do about what had happened, but he was ready to kill his brother who had tricked him and stolen his birthright. And Jacob knew it. Jacob woke with a start. He wiped the sweat from his face and rolled over. His sons were still talking and laughing. As the sleep washed over him and the dreams returned, he wished they would keep quiet. He wished that they would just go away. Go away, your mother was telling him. Go away as far as you can. Go to my brother Laban. Jacob went and discovered that his mother's deceitfulness was something that ran in the family. Jacob's uncle Laban had 2 daughters, and Jacob fell in love with the youngest one almost at once. Jacob stirred in his sleep as painful images from the past came into his mind. Work for me for 7 years, Uncle Laban was telling him, and pretty Rachel will be your wife. So Jacob worked. It was long, hard, honest labour, but when the wedding day arrived, he was shocked to find a different daughter by his side. Leah's the oldest, Uncle Laban grinned, neglecting to mention that she was by far the plainest as well. It's only fair that she should marry first. But I suppose if you worked, say, another 7 years for me, you could marry Rachel too. Jacob had been tricked. Jacob was livid, and it was only now, seeing himself in his dream, that he was able to recognize the same expression that had been on his brother Esau's face. Trickery or not, Jacob was determined to win Rachel, and seeing as there was no other ugly daughters hanging about, he thought that he stood a decent chance this time. So, in order to marry the girl he truly loved, Jacob worked for another 7 years. Jacob was tossing and turning now, and he shivered as his dreams brought back more memories. Now Jacob was a grown man with wives and a family and servants and flocks of his own. More than anything, he wanted to go back home. But would Esau still want revenge? Would Jacob's life still be in danger? He did not know the answer to those questions. All he could do was return and hope. When he had reached the borders of his brother's land, Jacob sent his servants ahead of him. Take the sheep and the cattle with you, he told them, and if you should meet Esau, tell him that they are a gift from his brother Jacob, a brother who longs to be reunited with him. Next, Jacob sent his family as an expression of his trust and goodwill. So now he was to spend one night alone at the side of the river Jabbok, a night that would change his life forever. It might have been a dream itself, so strange was the experience. But as he watched it again, Jacob knew that it had been real. His attacker came from nowhere, out of the dark and the night. He grabbed Jacob round the waist and threw him to the ground. Jacob tore himself free from the attacker and turned to face him. He expected to see a thief or a madman, maybe, or perhaps even his brother Esau. But Jacob's attacker was none of those. He was bigger and stronger than any man Jacob had ever seen. And there was something about him that made Jacob wonder if he was even human. Jacob knew he should run away, but there was something inside him that needed to go on wrestling. He'd been wrestling all his life, it seemed, wrestling with his father and his brother and his uncle Laban, wrestling to hold on to what he believed was his. And so he held on to his attacker as well. They wrestled all through the night. "Who are you?" Jacob cried. "What do you want?" But his attacker did not answer him. They grunted and struggled and rolled to the ground. And even when the attacker put Jacob's hip out of joint, Jacob did not let go. Finally, as the sun began to rise, Jacob's opponent spoke. "Let me go," he said. "The day is upon us." "No," Jacob answered, struggling for breath. "I will not let you go unless you give me something." "All right, then," the opponent agreed. "You will no longer be called Jacob. I will give you a new name. From now on, you shall be known as Israel. For, as the name suggests, you have struggled with God and persisted to the end." Struggled with God? Jacob wondered. But that must mean... And so he asked. He had to ask. "Then what is your name?" Jacob's opponent smiled and said, "I think you already know the answer to that question." And then he was gone. Jacob fell to the ground and rubbed his aching hip. Could it be, he wondered? Could it really be that he had seen the face of God, wrestled with the Almighty, and lived? And suddenly everything made sense. The whole of his long wrestling life, God had a purpose for him. The struggles were all for a reason, to shape him and make him into the man, then the family, then the nation that God had promised to his father Isaac and his grandfather Abraham. And so Jacob rose and limped across the river, made peace with his brother Esau, and returned to the land of promise. It looked as if everything would turn out all right. But now Jacob's dream had become a nightmare. For Joseph, his special son, was dead, and all the struggling and wrestling had been for nothing. Meanwhile, outside the tent, two of Jacob's older sons listened to him, stirring and groaning. "He's not taking it well," one son observed. "What did you expect?" shrugged the other. "Joseph was his favourite." "Perhaps we should have told him the truth, that Joseph was sold into slavery." "What? And admit that we were the ones who did the selling?" "I don't think so. And besides, it's all quite fitting if you ask me. The old man got up to his fair share of tricks when he was our age. Now the last laugh is on him." It wasn't, of course, for the God who wrestled with Jacob had one more trick up his God-spiced sleeve. Joseph was on his way to Egypt, and when he arrived, God would help him rise to the top of the kingdom, where he would one day save his family and be united with them again. But that's another story, about another dreamer and another set of dreams. So a story about a Bible baddie, and like a lot of the Bible goodies, most of them were bad at some time or other. In fact, only Jesus was the one who was good all the time. Well, there you are. The last story before Christmas. I'll have a Christmassy story, though, for the last Sunday before Christmas. In the meantime, stay safe. God be with you. I'll see you next week.